Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I'm not going to talk about too much in terms of screening, etc. Thank you very much for this invitation to talk to you a little bit about where we're at in the post-genome era with regard to what we are doing for breast cancer management. And then, because Sue has been pressing me for 2 years now, she said, you're allowed to talk about this, but if you don't say anything about melanomas and breast cancer, don't come and talk. Is that right, Sue? Anyway, so just when we talk about breast cancer occurrence in the general population, as most of you know, the occurrence of breast cancer can be explained by inherited genetic susceptibility, acquired genetic changes, effects of the endogenous and exogenous environment in its broadest spectrum, and it's the interaction amongst these factors that lead to the occurrence of breast cancer. And specifically, when we talk about breast cancer susceptibility genes, we are now at the point where we realize that we can divide them up into 3 classes based on the risk and the frequency with which these risk alleles occur in the population. So the first genes that we, as an international community, managed to clone and get answers on were the high-risk genes, where you have high penetrance and very low frequency in the population. And the intermediate risk group of genes with moderate penetrance are the ones that followed on their tails, if we can call it that, with the low-risk genes being the very, very difficult ones to find because they show low penetrance, although their allele frequency is quite high in the general population. So when we talk about these high penetrance genes, as I said, we are talking about rare allele frequencies in the general population. And so when we talk about public health, then a low risk for the population in general. However, in terms of the specific individuals and families who carry these rare high penetrant alleles, their risk is extremely high to develop cancer. And therefore we see this classic Mendelian pattern of inheritance, classic family history, strong family history of breast cancer. And so that's how we got about sorting out which genes are involved, because we could collect families that have these very strong history of breast cancer and its associated cancer, ovarian cancer. When we talk about the moderate penetrant genes, these are moderately penetrant. Their allele frequency is 1% and less in the general population. So once again, in terms of population risk, it's moderate to low, compared once again to individuals from these families where they show moderate penetrance. The allele frequencies are a little bit higher, and so classically what you would see in this situation is familial aggregation of breast cancers, but it doesn't show a clear Mendelian pattern of inheritance. And so there's the difference between the high penetrant genes and the moderate penetrant genes. There's not that strong family history of cancer. And then the low penetrant genes, they've begun surfacing from the year 2007. And these are genes that have been found in these huge, huge international collaborative studies of thousands and thousands of women with breast cancer compared to control groups, looking genome-wide for risk alleles. And to date, 7 loci have been reliably identified and in repeated studies have been shown to be involved in an increased risk for breast cancer. These alleles are fairly common in the general population, and so the population risk is much higher then compared to the individual risk. And so you won't really see a family history, and these individuals will then be seen as the so-called sporadic cases of breast cancer. However, these low penetrant genes and these rare, very high common alleles pose a problem for us, because if somebody tests positive for this particular variant as an individual, what is the risk for this individual? We know the penetrance is very low. So what do we do? From a clinical perspective and in terms of management, this is the group that we don't really know what to do with at the moment. When we talk then about these different loci and the genes that are involved, all of the genes that we have found now internationally lie between the blue and the red lines here, with the very rare high penetrant alleles showing the very high risk but low allele frequency in the general population. These are the BRCA1, BRCA2 genes, the P53 gene, and then one or two other genes that, in addition to some other cancers, also have a high risk for breast cancer. Then there's the moderate penetrant group. Once again, the allele frequency is now increasing a little bit more in the general population, and they then have moderate penetrance, moderate increased risk, and then the last group where the problem lies in terms of clinical applications, what to do, we don't really know, and as you can see clearly, then what we have here is an inverse correlation between cancer risk and allele frequency. So the more common the allele frequency, the lower the cancer risk is in terms of this particular individual. The lower the allele frequency, the higher the cancer risk for the individual. Now, what is very interesting is when you go and look at all of these genes that have to date been found, they mostly are proteins that interact, the code for proteins that interact with each other, and they are all part of this, what is known as the Fanconi anemia pathway. Their normal job is to be involved in homologous recombination that occurs, natural process, and also you can have double-strand breaks happening, and they are the proteins that get together and are very important in repairing these double-strand breaks via the homologous recombination pathway. Now, when we talk about these genes, so what are the risks that we are really talking about? When we say that we are talking about high penetrance genes, low allele frequency in the general population, but strong family history, then the risks vary from between 28 to 87% by age 70 for these three highly penetrant gene mutations. BRCA1 and BRCA2 are more commonly mutated in breast cancer families compared to the P53 gene, which is a very rare syndrome called the Li-Fraumeni syndrome. And so, in actual fact, most of what we are seeing in terms of very strong family history are the BRCA1 and 2 genes.